On this video, I'm going to discuss a few words about the weekly reading, the Parashah. We are now going to be reading Parshat Vayigash. By the way, an interesting Parsha in a certain sense that it starts right in the middle. It kind of leaves you in suspense. The decision to make that a separate Parashah is probably based on the idea that in the end of Parshat Miketz, we are hanging in suspense what's going to happen when Yehuda is starting his monologue before Yosef, and in the beginning of this Parsha, we learn what actually did happen. And one question that a lot of people ask: why did Yehuda have to say such a long speech? Why did he not just ask, "Can I be your servant instead of Binyamin?" And Ramban asked that question and says, among other things, that he just wanted to try to make Yosef feel bad for the situation. Of course, according to Yosef, if Binyamin in fact did steal from him the goblet, it would sound reasonable to make him a slave. In fact, he was already merciful enough not to kill him. But with all that, since Binyamin wouldn't have been brought even had it not been for the request of Yosef. The brothers didn't want to bring Binyamin. His father didn't want to bring him. So Yehuda was trying to say that you don't want that through your actions something bad will happen, even if it's not really your fault. According to your words, it's nobody's fault. It's the fault of Binyamin himself. But still, this may cause the death of his father. You don't really want that because of your actions something so terrible would happen. And in general, trying to pacify him in many different ways. A number of commentators, including Malbim, offer an interesting idea that the king has a different type of judgment than regular courts. Meaning regular courts have much less wiggle room. There are specific rules on what the punishment is for what. But the king, he has a second type of judgment where he could include in the judgment other factors that regular courts generally cannot. For example, if there is a person who deserves to be put to jail, let's say, for 50 years, but he has a family, and the family will suffer, the courts generally can do much less in terms of changing the verdict simply because there are other people who are going to suffer. Well, you should have thought before. Just because other people suffer, that doesn't mean you cannot punish this individual. But the king could have his own judgment. He can judge in ways that are not according to the letter of the law. And similarly, by the way, with regards to the beginning of Book of Esther, we learn that Achashverosh, the king, had now a possibility to judge according to the judgment of the king. This was what Mihuman told him, that the king can judge in different ways and he should be able to punish Vashti in ways that regular judges cannot judge. So at any rate, that's why, says Malbim, the Parsha starts with the idea, Ki kamocha ki Paro, you're like Paro, meaning just like Paro can judge in ways that are not according to the letter of the law. So to you have the right to forgive Binyamin, even if he, according to the letter of the law, should be punished. Another interesting question, why among children of Yaakov, when the whole family is listed, why are and Onan, who died, listed again? So various answers can be given, but one of the answers is that maybe they came back as Gilgul. The Kabbalists, Mikubalim, say that either the next children of Yehuda, Peretz and Zerach, were Gilgulim of and Onan, or possibly the children of Peretz himself, meaning grandchildren of Yehuda, were Gilgulim of and Onan. This, by the way, explains another interesting question. If you see the chronology of events, the number of years that passed from the time of sale of Yosef till the time the family of Yaakov came to Egypt, there seems to be not enough time for all these events to happen that are written in Parshat Vayeshev. That Yehuda had 3 children, then Tamar had much later children from Yehuda, and then one of her children, Peretz, also had 2 other children. But if you say that the two other children were actually born in Egypt, they were kind of counted among the 70 in potential because there were compensations of the dead Er and Onan. Because indeed, if it wasn't for their sins, Er and Onan would have been alive, and there would have been 70 souls. So according to this, maybe when the family of Yaakov was actually entering Egypt, there was not yet 70 people, but the Torah counts the potential, their souls that would come back later as grandchildren of Yehuda and would be born in Egypt. Now, in general, in terms of the number 70, by the way, what I just said, there are other answers too. There are possibilities that the story of Yosef and the story of Yehuda were taking place in parallel, meaning it's not that after Yosef was sold only did Yehuda marry and have children from his first wife. It could have been that happened earlier. A number of commentators like Ibn Ezra and Ralbag explain that way. Or possibly in old times there were situations when sometimes people had children at relatively young age. It does happen sometimes in our day too. There were unverified cases, but it's reasonable to assume that apparently these cases are true of people giving birth at very young age as a kind of exclusion. So at any rate, there are other explanations of how these events could have happened so quickly. But there's another question about the 70 souls in general. The Torah counts 70 people coming to Egypt, but it seems when you count the actual number, well, first of all, 70 includes, of course, Yosef and his two children who are already in Egypt, but even with that, when you count everybody, you get 69. So there are three general answers given to this question. One answer is that you count Yaakov with the 70. Another answer is that you count a woman who was born just as they were entering Egypt, according to Chazal. It doesn't say that in the Torah, but our sages assume that the mother of Moshe, Yocheved, was born as they were entering Egypt. That would make her, by the way, pretty old at the time she gave birth to Moshe. That's why Ibn Ezra, one of the commentators, disagrees with this and says that if there would be such a huge miracle that she was giving birth to Moshe at such an advanced age, the Torah would have mentioned it. So, at any rate, there is a possibility that Yocheved was born when they were entering Egypt, and she's the 70th. There's one other possibility that apparently one opinion in Midrash holds, that the sons of Dan Hushim, it says in the Torah, the sons in plural of Dan were Hushim. That maybe it's two different people actually, each one named Chosh. And the plural is Hushim. It's not impossible, people sometimes name their two children by the same name. We find that in the Gemara also. There was a sage who had two children, and basically they called their children junior and senior. But they had the same name according to Rashi and Tosafot. Both children had the same name, and they just called them to distinguish junior and senior. So it could be that Dan had two children with the same name. Although there are difficulties with this approach, but that's one possibility. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky also discusses this possibility, but there are problems with it, which we're not going to go into now. Next question. I'm just covering various interesting tidbits and points with regards to this parasha. So, why are Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah not mentioned when they're coming to Egypt? The answer might be that they already passed away by that time. At least Ramban holds that way. Rashi seems to hold that Bilhah was still there, and in fact she was the one to whom the hint in the dream of Yosef of the moon was. That was Bilhah who when Yosef's mother died, she became like a mother for him, kind of stepmother, I guess. How many daughters did Yaakov have, by the way, in that family? It seems that daughters again is said in plural. But if you say that sons of Dan Hushim, sons could mean one son, there are other precedents in the Tanakh, in the Bible, where plural is used for singular. So it could be that daughters mean just Dinah. The only daughter that's mentioned in the Torah is Dinah. But there are sages who understand that Yaakov did have other daughters. It's just the Torah usually, since all the genealogies are through males, doesn't mention unless something important happened to that person. So there is one granddaughter mentioned, Serach, and one daughter mentioned, Dinah. But that doesn't mean that there were no other granddaughters and no other daughters. It would be very surprising if of all the children of Yaakov, nobody had daughters, meaning Yaakov didn't have any other granddaughters out of this big family, only Serach. It would be a huge surprise. A lot more likely there were other daughters that his children had. But Serach was an important woman who is mentioned in other places, and Dinah, of course, there's a whole story about her in the Chumash. That's why they're mentioned. But since we're talking only about genealogies, all the other daughters and granddaughters, They were not mentioned because they're not counted in the genealogies, as those genealogies are through males, and there's nothing that happened to them that the Torah wants to discuss, so they're just simply not mentioned. It says that Yosef took 5 brothers to meet Paro. Who were those 5 brothers? So here it's very interesting. There are disputes among Chazal. Sages argue which are the 5 brothers. But they all agree that Yosef tried to show Paro the weakest of his brothers. He took the ones that looked less strong. Why? Because he did not want Paro to take them as into his army, basically. He didn't want Paro. He wanted the Jews to live separately. It's enough that he has to deal with Paro all the time. That was Mina Shamayim, as we say. It happened that way that Hashem wanted. But he didn't really want all the Jewish people to become part of the governing power. He wasn't trying to get into the greatest, highest politics in Egypt or highest positions. It would only cause greatest anti-Semitism. And it says in the Torah that Yosef told him, you should make sure we tell Paro that you are just shepherds and toevat Mitzrayim. It's disgusting in Egyptians' eyes, people who are shepherds. So they'll let you live separately in the land of Goshen, which is good for sheep, good for animals, and at the same time they will kind of stay away from you. So the question is, what does it mean, toevat Mitzrayim? I think the simplest understanding is like Rashbam, that it actually is disgusting in the eyes. Like, for instance, there are certain societies where people of specific professions are treated lower. It's not really correct to do that, but let's say in many places they would look like on a person, let's say, who collects garbage, a garbage collector, as a kind of low and despicable individual, which is completely incorrect. It's wrong to do that. There's a story by Rabbi Chaim Walder that in Israel, a certain son of a garbage collector was despised by his classmates once they found out that his father is a garbage collector, and they made fun of him, and the whole union of garbage collectors made a strike. And when the mayor came and said, what do you want? Of course, it's a big thing if the strike of garbage collectors, the garbage is not going to be picked up. It's going to lead to all kinds of problems and disease and smell and everything, and rats. So they said, we want that our children will be treated like regular kids. We don't want more money. We're not asking for anything else. We're asking only that we'll be treated with respect and dignity, which is, by the way, what Torah requires. It doesn't matter what the person does for a living. You have to respect other people. Somebody has to collect garbage, and they're no worse individuals than anybody else. And guess what? They were able to do that. And the law was in that city in Israel, from then on, the law was that if somebody makes fun of children of garbage collectors, they don't have to pick up his garbage. Anyway, so my point is that shepherds may have been simply in Egypt at the time mistreated and looked at as kind of disgusting, lowly individuals who deal with animals. That's the simplest understanding that Rashbam, the grandson of Rashi, brings, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. But most opinions understand that toeva here is what the Torah calls their abomination, meaning what they worship actually is their god, that somehow these people worship sheep. There are problems with this approach because it seems that Paro himself had animals, as it says later in the Torah, that he tells the brothers, if any of them are bnei chayil, like good and capable individuals, let them be on top of the animals that I possess. So it seems like he had people who were pasturing animals too. But there are attempts to explain that difficulty. Maybe they did have shepherds, but those shepherds treated those animals as holy animals. They weren't slaughtering them or eating them. They were just basically taking care of their avodah zarah, of their idols, or other possibilities that exist. There is one other place in the Torah later when the whole issue is brought up again, and that is when Moshe tells Paro that we're not going to sacrifice the animals in the land of Egypt. We'll have to go away for 3 days. Why can't we do it in the land of Egypt? Because how could we take toevat Mitzrayim, same word is used, the abomination of Egypt, and they're not going to stone us? So usually it's assumed that here it's clear proof that Egyptians would stone people who bring sacrifice the animals that they worship. So it seems like they were worshiping the sheep. Just like, for instance, in India, there's holy cows. Maybe in Egypt they had holy sheep. Sheep, by the way, is the first sign of zodiac. Cow, right? A bull is the second. Taurus. But there are possibilities still, according to Rashbam, that we're talking about taiva mamash. This is just disgusting. They would not think of how could you bring something disgusting like this to as a sacrifice, and therefore they would like stone in a sense, not that they would kill out of jealousy for their gods, but the opposite. They would look at them and throw stones at them. Look at these Jews, what they're doing. They're bringing a sacrifice out of sheep. It's so disgusting. So, like again, if we continue the analogy of garbage, if people who were raising cattle for them were like garbage collectors, then they would probably look at them as if you're offering your garbage as a sacrifice. I mean, what kind of people are these? So, like I said, there's two basic different understandings of what Toevat Mitzrayim means. Right? Something disgusting, or the opposite, something that they consider a god of sorts, their idol. And depending on interpretation, you have to understand the verses very differently. Now, by the way, before in Parshat Vayeshev, and especially in Parshat Miketz, it seemed that the Egyptians never eat together with the Hebrews. So does that support the idea that the Egyptians somehow didn't eat meat? But again, if sheep were their gods, how would they allow the Hebrews to eat meat then? Were they not jealous at all that the other people eat what they consider godly? I mean, in India, even if you're not Hindu, if you start mistreating cows, you'll be judged, and in all times probably very seriously punished. So it seems that Rashbam's pshat is much more acceptable, at least according to the simple meaning, that the taiva is not their god. By the way, there's absolutely no evidence from what we know about Egypt, and we know quite a lot about Egypt today, much more than about many other countries. And there's no evidence that they didn't eat meat or that they worshipped sheep at that time period. And on this, just one short question also with regards to where did land of Goshen, where was that part of Egypt where the Jewish people ended up? So it seems to be that most of it was towards Eretz Israel, closer to the land of Israel. But it seems at least that from later, right, from Sefer Shemot, that Moshe and probably many of the Levites, maybe the more aristocratic Jews, lived in the capital. Unless you say that Paro happened to be in the area where there were a lot of Jews at the time of when all these events in the beginning of Shemot were happening. That is also a possibility, because maybe Paro had more than one palace, maybe something like winter palace, summer palace, because you see that when Moshe is coming to Paro without any problems, he seems to be living in the same city, not just in the same country. And it's extremely unlikely that Paro would be living in the land of Goshen, at least permanently. So therefore, it would be forced to say that Moshe and probably the Levites in general, the aristocratic Jews, lived in the capital. By the way, in the Soviet Union, where I'm from, used to be before the revolution, the Jews were not permitted to live in big cities. They lived in specifically what's called Pale Settlement. But the more important Jews, they had special permission to live in the capital cities. So it could be that something like that existed in Egypt. But the main bulk of Jews, the simpler Jews and all the working Jews, the slaves of Egyptians, they all worked in a specific area of Goshen mostly. And as we see here and later in the Torah as well. And on this way, in this video, please click like if you liked it.